Hello, and welcome to the season finale of Inspiring Psychologists, Breaking the Mold of Private Practice. I'm your host, Wendy Kendall, a psychologist and private practice coach, dedicated to helping you break out of the box and build a thriving, innovative private practice. We've reached episode 12, and today's episode is both inspiring and timely. We've titled it Moving Beyond Extractive Models, Building a Psychology Practice with Social and Environmental Impact. In this episode, we explore how our practices can lead the transition from an extractive economy centered on unsustainable growth towards a well-being economy which focuses on prosperity for all within planetary boundaries. Joining me for this important conversation are two pioneering guests, Dr. Quinn-Cirillo, founder of the Conversations Starter Project, and Dr. Rachel Yates, founder of Climate Parenting. They'll share their steps towards a well-being economy and discuss the power of psychology in driving climate action through community engagement. Throughout our discussion, we touch on key themes, such as the ripple effects of small actions, social tipping points, and the important role of psychology. Our guests delve into how they engage directly with local communities, create sustainable, long-lasting solutions, and inspire others through their work. We're not just mental health practitioners. We are heart-driven leaders. We have the potential and the responsibility to guide society through a just transition. But to do so, we must be willing to break the mold of old business models. So if you're ready to reshape not only your practice but also the world, then this is the episode for you. Before we dive in, don't forget to join the conversation in our Inspiring Psychology Practices Facebook group and visit inspiringpsych.com. That's inspiringpsych.com for more resources and insights from our guests. Without further ado, let's dive into this impactful season finale. Hello, and welcome to the Inspiring Psychologist podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Kendall, a psychologist and a private practice coach, and this is episode 12, Moving Beyond Extractive Models, Building a Psychology Practice with Social and Environmental Impact. So we find ourselves at a unique juncture in time. The IPCC released its synthesis report for the sixth assessment report earlier this year, and it underscored the imperative need for a swift and just transition to an economy that is centered around well-being and not only or merely gross domestic product. And so for me, hearing some of the press around this and following this very closely, this raised a really essential question for me, which was how can our private practices serve as a vanguard for that change? If we're really talking about massive transformation, if we're talking about moving towards a well-being economy, then for me, our role as psychologists and therapists and our role in terms of leaders of private practices has an enormous, role to play in this. So I figure that the world of private practice is right at this juncture too. We've seen demand for mental health care rocketing. There's a shortage of providers, and that's persisting. So it's clear that traditional models of private practice need a drastic reinvention. Investors have been pouring money into scalable platforms, but many of them have essentially monetized that distress, both in direct payments for services, but also in harvesting data to sell about its clients and at the most benign use to advertisers. So to me, that's a system based on extraction. So I'm thinking about, how do we change how do we be the change that we want to see in the world? I want to think about how we change models of private practice that foster isolation and burnout among providers. And that's both toxic and it's also unsustainable. So we have a responsibility, I think, to challenge the status quo in private practice and to reimagine what private practice can be. It's not simply providing templated solutions for working within that broken system, but for me, I think it's about shaping a more regenerative way of working. So we're delving into this crucial topic today. And that's why I've invited Dr. Tara Quinn-Cirillo, a chartered counselling psychologist and founder of the Conversation Starter Project, aimed at enhancing mental health wellbeing in the community, and Dr. Rachel Yates, a clinical psychologist and founder of Climate Parenting. So welcome to you both. Hi there. Good morning.
Hi, Wendy.
Hello, thank you.
Hi. So, thanks so much for being here. I know that both of you are very busy practitioners, and so I was delighted to connect with both of you, I think also through LinkedIn. And Tara, I've seen you around a bit because obviously you have the Adversity Psychologist podcast. Yeah. Rachel, I just got to find out about you and I leapt on you and DM'd you through LinkedIn to say, can you come and be on this podcast? And you were really gracious and kind of and accepted, after a discussion about what it's all about, and kind of agreed to come on. So could I ask you both for a bit of an introduction, please? Tara, would you be happy to go first?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Tara Quinn-Cirillo. I've been a psychologist for over 20 years. I do run my own private practice, but off the back of the pandemic in 2021, I set up a community project, which has now just become a community interest company, so a not-for-profit, just trying to tackle loneliness, isolation, and emotional health issues after the pandemic, free to access for community people. I run walk and talk sessions, but we also do psychoeducation and helping the community to help each other, really. So a really nice way to get my NHS roots, the philanthropic me that wants everybody to be able to access things, to also meet with psychology and bringing those principles to the community and helping them understand how they can empower themselves to manage their emotional well-being.
Yeah. And I'm going to come back to, because I'm really intrigued in the story of how a private practice also somehow led to, or maybe it didn't lead to that. What was the kind of origin story of that? I'm just going to come over to you, Rachel. First of all, could you give a bit of an introduction into yourself as well, and also into climate parenting?
Sure. Hi. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I qualified in London as a clinical psychologist, but I'm now based in Barcelona. And since qualifying, I mostly worked in children's services in the NHS, mostly in the field of autism, and become kind of increasingly concerned about the climate emergency, particularly since my own little girl was born a couple of years ago. And so kind of made a shift to thinking I want to work in some form relating to that. And also the move here meant that I was kind of thinking about new directions anyway. And I've taken some training in climate change coaching. And I've kind of trying to combine my background in working with parents, my own experience as a parent, and climate change coaching to support parents who are concerned about climate change and the destruction of the natural world more generally in terms of the biodiversity crisis as well. Yeah. And it's a topic that stirs up strong emotions in people, I think, once you really begin to look at it. And I think parenting brings additional layers to that in terms of sort of thinking about what our responsibility is to our children in terms of their own emotional well-being, but also how we kind of engage with thinking about supporting societal change for their future. And a lot of people are increasingly worried about this, even though it's a topic that we don't talk about as much as you'd think that would reflect that level of concern. And so I kind of thought about lots of different ideas, but came around to this idea, and I'm now offering an online coaching program for parents, and I'm just piloting the first group at the moment. And it's an idea of kind of bringing people together to share kind of form community around those concerns, have a place to open up conversations that are often sort of not had, and think about how we can support our own emotional well-being, but also our children's in the context of what's happening in the world. So I'm really happy that we're having this discussion, because I think often these topics we're thinking what politicians can do, what climate scientists can do, but I think in some ways they've solved the problem already, and what's left is kind of economic and political, but it's definitely behavioural as well. And so I think as psychologists we have an important part to play that maybe we don't think about that as often as we could.
Yeah, and something that I think is really important there that I learned from following and listening to, I think I went to an event that was being run by the Climate Coaching Alliance. I'm getting the name right. And the main thing that I took from it was, we need to talk about this. We need to start opening our mouths, because a lot of people are really concerned about this. I see it as, the two sides of the same coin, which is, the problem that we've been dealing with is rampant extraction and exploitation for many decades. And part and parcel of that is the environmental destruction that goes with it, and the rampant inequality that goes with it, which speaks to what you're addressing here, and a lot of what we work with as psychologists and what we really care about. So for me, addressing, thinking about moving beyond extractive models, moving beyond an extractive world, focusing on well-being, we're right there addressing it, and have been for a long time. So Tara, I wanted to come back to you and kind of work through a little bit this origin story of, being in private practice, developing a brand that's around the adversity psychologist, which to my ear starts to speak to this topic a little bit as well. And then that, as you said, experiencing what was going on through the pandemic and developing this, now moving into a CIC. So can you share some of that story with us, please?
I think, like most people, when that first lockdown happened, I was trying to move my what was face-to-face clinic online overnight, having a panic, don't know how to use Zoom, what even is Zoom. And I also felt a little bit helpless. And I'm sure a lot of psychologists thought, well, we've got skills, things that we could use. So I basically set up a small little Facebook down in Sussex group to try and help people with the kind of emotional fallout. And I ran that for about a year or so during 2020. And then I thought, actually, when we were allowed to start to meet face-to-face outside, I thought I can do more. So basically, I wanted to reach more people. Not everyone can pay privately to see a psychologist. I need to get paid. I have bills to pay. So I wanted two things to meet together. So the philanthropic element is me setting up what were just originally walk and talk sessions in my local park for adults, where people could come and connect safely. A lot of people hadn't seen anyone in months. I had people who hadn't left their home in several months. A lot of people who'd lost people, all sorts, the whole emotional health, people with pre-existing mental health needs who didn't have access to much during the pandemic. So I just started walk and talk sessions. I stood in the park with a book in case no one turned up the very first day, because I thought I'm going to look like an idiot. So all of my vulnerabilities are out there, and now they're even more out there. And it has just morphed. So I took on a business partner, and now we have this really fantastic model where what I want to do, and it sounds incredibly cheesy, but it's not meant to be, is to empower people to manage their own well-being. So I use the psychologist part of me as a framework to manage risk and crisis and all of those things, lots of safeguarding protocols. Obviously, you can't just walk and talk around a park. All sorts of people come from all sorts of walks of life. So I can bring those principles of psychology, but I help people. I don't actually do any intervention. The intervention is just the pathways I have behind it and the referral agencies that refer into us. People walk around the park and talk, and they have to do that themselves. So that's where it's different. So it's bringing all those principles of research and theory, safeguarding risk, crisis management to help people safely do that. And it's free, and it's remained free. So for the past 3 years, and that's why I have to obviously run my private practice as well, I've done everything in a philanthropic way. Nobody I have volunteers that work for me now. Everybody does it out of just the kindness and the goodness of their hearts, really. And that's what makes it special. It's quite magic, if I can say. People give, and the people that come, the regulars that come, you don't have to book. You just turn up. So we take away all those barriers, no booking and having to cancel. We don't start on time. So all of those little things look accidental, but they're on purpose. And people give as much as they get. And I couldn't have planned for that. So lots of people who come now help me to facilitate and run them and help other people to feel safe and confident. And we just talk, and we talk about anything. There's no structure. It's not a mental health group. It's actually just helping people with the kind of grassroots of emotional well-being, which is what we need. Plenty of mental health groups out there. It's just a free service, and people like it and they come back, and it just seems to work.
And so I started writing notes like furiously as you were talking there, and there's so many things I want to pick up on there. In last week's episode, we were talking about relationships. And I don't know if anyone's heard or saw that, or if they've listened to it already. Yeah. But yeah, we were talking about Dr. Vicky Ioana was talking about therapeutic community.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of discussion on LinkedIn afterwards around that. And the thing that really struck me there was how we've got like there is a healing potential built into humanity, which is at the power of community. Absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the life force that has, brought us to 600,000 years of evolution or whatever it is. I'm not an anthropologist, so but I think for me that is one of the things when I'm thinking about as a psychologist, how can we resource communities so that they can switch from languishing towards flourishing, utilizing their own resources.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's really regenerative, because that's about creating the conditions for life, as opposed to this mechanical mindset, which is about, we need to be in there controlling all the variables in order to create an outcome, which is the way that we've done things a lot in mental health services, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that really spoke to me. And what I love is your focus on removing barriers to that thing happening.
Absolutely. We've all been there. I'll book something and then not be able to go, or feel I don't want to, and now I've got to cancel. And then what does that do to the next time? And for a lot of people that come on our walk and talk sessions, particularly, they have a history of mental health issues, or they may have some neurological issues if we have people with additional needs, and you don't want those barriers. So we're always there. It does mean that we often stand freezing cold in the rain, and maybe one person comes, maybe 20 people come, but we remove those barriers. We don't cancel our walks either. They're really simple things actually that have just evolved. You can't plan for those things when you're setting up a project, but actually they're the elements that work best, because it takes away, and if you're that person, and I've got permission to share, I've had a wonderful example of people who followed us for months. I had one woman who sat in her car for several weeks before she got out and joined one of our walks. And that's the things that I want to get out there, that if we had to start and it was a group where you sit down on chairs, she wouldn't have come in. If it got to 10:05 and we start at 10 o'clock, people come 10 past, quarter past the hour. They join us halfway round. They can leave at any time. And those are all the barriers, usually, when you think of traditional mental health groups or services. You've got to be there for the whole time. You're in a room. And even though you can open a door and go, there's more psychological barriers there, whereas we meet in the open. So there's a lot of safeguarding that goes on. But once that's in place and we've done that work, it makes it super easy. And that's how it should be. And that's what facilitates people feeling safe, secure, and coming back again as well.
Yeah. So the phrase that came up for me, which I jotted down, was creating conduits for kindness and contribution. It's opening channels as opposed to making things happen. I mean, I'm not saying you're not making things happen, but it's like this opening of channels as opposed
purely
to,
like, we call it organic. Things just kind of happen. And then my partner and I kind of look at each other and go, wow, that really works, and then pretend we'd thought of that all along. But that's the magic of it. You have to be very vulnerable doing this. I'm sure you'll agree, Rachel, that when you're trying something a bit new and it's outside that model of what psychologists do, and are we going to be
Yeah.
judged? And psychologists do like to judge each other sometimes. I will throw that
Yeah.
out there. That, you know, is this robust enough? Is it scientific enough? Is it, you know, going to be what I'm supposed to be doing? But if you can kind of just lean into some of those tricky things, we can do some really great stuff in communities. And the idea is that if my partner Shirley and I stopped tomorrow, the people would carry on doing this. So, you know, if we're not there one week, or we're on holiday and some of our volunteers are running, it still works. And those people go away and tell other people. And, you know, the idea with our model is that we want it then to be taken on board. You know, it'll roll out because it's so easy. It's almost too simple. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. That's made millions of light bulbs go off in my head. So I will try and rein myself in at that point, because it's always a risk with me. Rachel, I'm going to come over to you for kind of your origin story. It almost sounds like a daft question, really, when I'm asking a parent, why is climate parenting really important to you? But tell us more about the story, like the origin story of this.
Yeah, sure. I can relate this sense of what you were just discussing about community, because definitely, personally for me, kind of finding a community within which to sort of think about these things has been really helpful for me. And I hope that that's what also works and seems to be the feedback in the sessions that we're running. But in terms of, my own journey, I've kind of always cared about environment. I remember learning about the climate crisis in school, so kind of over 20 years ago. But I always was somebody who kind of wanted to work with people, and it felt like my route to go down psychology route. And so then I think within the NHS, it sort of takes up all your headspace and kind of thinking room really on top of kind of life with family and friends and so on. So I never quite found my space to address my environmental concerns. And but beyond kind of the odd demonstration and maybe doing things in my personal life. But then my daughter was born in 2021, and it was around the same time as one of the more recent IPCC reports came out. And I was reading things that weren't entirely unfamiliar, but they were kind of much more serious than they'd felt before, and suddenly they were really deeply personal. And it kind of was this mental shift for me that I have to somehow make this my work, because otherwise I'm not going to find space for it. And I spent a lot of time thinking, how can I get involved in addressing this using the kind of skills that I've got, and diving into exploring the topic as much as I could. And kind of realizing that although the science is really scary, there's a lot that needs to happen in a very short space of time. And sort of having a child makes me think of that time in a very different way. So suddenly this needs to happen before she will be finishing primary school, if we're going to really address this. And so it has to be now. I can't wait for me to sort of be sleeping through the night, for example. We have to try and get on board and do what we can. But also it's something where the scientists have told us what needs to happen, and they've done that part of the jigsaw. So it's how we can help shift people into being able to think and talk about this stuff and doing what needs to happen. And I read a really great book called The Future We Choose, which is talks about two different futures. One is where we carry on as normal, and the other future where we really get on board with making the changes that need to happen. And
I have that one.
You got that one? Yeah.
I'm sure that's on my desk. But there's millions, but sorry, go on.
No, it's so interesting, because it really makes the picture of what it might be like in the different scenarios very visceral. And I think sometimes it's really difficult to imagine the negative scenarios of what could happen, but understandably so. But it's also hard to imagine the positive future we're trying to move towards, and it's so important to visualize that as well.
Yes.
And it made me realize that actually change is happening. Change is difficult, but we don't get to avoid that. It's going to be changing the way we live one way or the other. So we might as well get involved in trying to make that change something positive. And I think connecting dots for me, that there's so many issues that are so interconnected. And, if we get it right, and if we really make the changes that need to happen in terms of the environment, it's not only climate and nature that solves itself in terms of kind of clean air and water and all these kind of things. It's also loads of other interconnected issues in terms of kind of education, equality, because it all has to be addressed together. And so, I sort of played with lots of different ideas for a little while and bounced around, but came around to this feeling that I've worked with parents previously, and it felt like the right space for me to get involved in. And also I think there's a lot of emphasis on children and what sort of young people are doing growing up. And I've always worked with children, but I really feel like it's not children that need to be solving this, partly because there's not time, and secondly because we don't want to sort of be putting that responsibility on their shoulders. And so felt like parenting was the right place to sort of be thinking about this issue for me.
And I'm just thinking about the generational aspects there as well. When we think about climate parenting, like my kids are now young adults, and I still feel like I'm climate parenting in that sense. And, thinking about them approaching a time when they might be thinking about having children, and therefore I'm becoming a climate grandparent in that sense. Mm-hmm. So is what you're offering also incorporating those multi-generational elements, or how might they be doing that?
It's so interesting. I've kind of tried to advertise it so that it's open to grandparents as much as parents and carers and really anybody who cares about a child in their life.
Yes.
But actually, it's been all mums so far in the group that I'm running. But I'm hopeful that will extend out. I think like the climate space is tending a bit like psychology to be quite female, but hopefully there's ways that we can broaden that.
Well, we'll just start where we are and we'll grow it from there, right? One of the things that I think both of you alluded to was that, if we think about the scale of the problem, we can become really overwhelmed and we can end up feeling powerless to make a change. Like, what difference does the thing that I'm doing? I know that I've been there as well. And, one of the quotes that I saw that is like my beacon of eternal hope was, now I always get the name wrong, but I've mentioned it in the podcast before. It was this statement by a Nobel Prize winning chemist. And he basically said, at the point of maximum chaos in a system, you have the maximum potential for islands of coherence to develop and to influence and tip the whole system. So just because it feels maximally chaotic doesn't mean there's actually a moment of real potential there for the smallest unit to start to influence the whole. And for me, that was like the life raft that I cling to, this idea that actually at a grassroots level, doing what we need to do, creating our so-called islands of coherence, we can be the ones to start to really make a shift at a big systemic level. So that was my life raft, if you like, and it's still the thing that I cling to. But for you, what helped you to see, Rachel, you mentioned reading The Future We Choose, that book, and it's giving you the bad scenarios and it's giving you the hopeful scenarios. For both of you, what was the thing that helped you to hold on to the hope, I guess? Coming to you, Tara.
Do you know what? I'm just thinking, actually, the original Facebook group that I set up, obviously people can put comments on, so you get a real sense of what people are going through. And although it was a very small thing in comparison with the whole of the UK, gave you that intimacy, that snapshot. And then with a project like mine, it's really tempted to get hooked up in how big it could be and where you could reach. And my business partner is really great at keeping us really grounded and slow, but just going, this is what people locally need. This is what's missing for them at the moment. This is what they're going to, or guessing what they're going to need when we did start to, reduce the amount of lockdowns and be able to kind of re-emerge again. And going forward, just every week, every time, we do all of our walks ourselves. We still go to all of them. Is that you take that time to talk to people and hear what they're going through, what they're anticipating, and that's what guides me. So it's less about kind of research and literature. We keep ahead of that, but for me, it's the people. What are these people coming along? What do they want? Because it's very easy to get lost in what, the wider society is saying we need in terms of mental health, tackling loneliness. We need that, but it's the bottom up bit as well, isn't it? It's the grassroots, as they say.
Yeah. So it's kind of focusing on fundamentals and responding to, I think one of the things that I've also learned and read about and observed and work with psychologists as they do this is that intimate connection with local community and the responding to needs. And the solutions are in there, basically. Yeah.
In this month's Psychologists magazine, the whole edition is centred around the Brighton conference, the European Psychology Conference, and the theme of that is around kind of bringing psychology to communities. And there's some spectacular quotes. I was flicking through that at the weekend, and just again, it's getting out of your comfort zone. As a psychologist, we all know, especially as practitioner psychologists, you know, what should psychology look like? Coming back to what I said before, am I doing okay? Is this proper work? You know, for the want of a scientific word. And there were so many different academics at Brighton University talking about that's exactly what it should be, you know, that we need to kind of move away almost from this fear that to be a psychologist is only this one mold, and that by doing something else is somehow not proper. And I think I've learned a lot with that, you know, the two things can coexist. We need the research, we need the theory, because that's what I'm drawing on to be able to run my project. But also I need to be in the community, being vulnerable, hearing from people, trying things out. Some things don't work. Sometimes we need to make tweaks. Sometimes we get it wrong. But that's part of it. And you've got to be quite vulnerable to do that.
Yeah, awesome. Rachel.
No, I definitely relate to that in terms of the feeling of needing to connect with others and I think in doing this, I feel like I found a place where I can be more authentically myself in some ways, because it's genuinely where I'm coming from when I'm kind of working with the people that I'm working with. And so the bit that tension then between when am I a psychologist and when am I part of this group, but it's still I think it's those relationships that really help to provide hope and seeing how ripple effects can happen. So I also have a book group that I run, which is a completely free thing for discussing climate and nature books and documentaries, and having read that Future We Choose book, I then put it on the list for the group, and we read it, and somebody then read that and fed back that they'd kind of discussed it with a friend of theirs who'd read it, who'd now put it on the kind of required reading for a course that she runs. And that was something that just gave me a lot of hope, this sense of something very small that I do just really because I felt like I needed it. And then there's ripple effects that you don't kind of even necessarily feel. So I think we often think, what's the big thing I can do? Because this topic is so big, it needs such a big action. And I somehow need to have an idea that's big enough. But actually, there's no one person who's going to solve all the problems out there. And we just have to sort of think, I think, what are our skill sets and passions, and how do they marry up with what's needed, and do a little piece. And I think accepting that's the role, and as long as I'm doing my piece of it, I sort of somehow trying to believe in that other people will be doing the same, and that will hopefully lead us in the right direction. And I think a sense that touches on what you said before, Wendy, that's like this change isn't necessarily linear. So even though kind of it feels excruciatingly slow change in terms of climate and nature, it is something which is building kind of energy, I think, and a bit like negative tipping points in terms of catastrophe in this topic. Really, I think social change can happen in that way too, and one thing can lead to another, and suddenly something is much easier. And I think we've seen that in terms of things like renewable energy, the prices are coming down. So I mean, that's economic, but I think socially it can happen in a similar way. And small things might seem like they don't make a big difference, but they can in terms of the way people think about these things, and then they open up people's minds to thinking about bigger changes that could be possible.
That's true. And as we're thinking about that, you know, this topic of the small things that we can do, there is so much negativity out there about the people who are doing the small things. You know, there's always those, you know, wherever they've come from, those trolls on social media who are very happy to kind of, I mean, I think most of them are probably from troll farms, you know, and all these kind of things, these influencing campaigns that apparently, you know, people run these businesses. But, you know, that sense of, oh, you've been doing X. Well, that just means, you know, that means nothing because. But actually, the small things are the things that are going to tip the system. You know, we really really can support the small things. As you said, Tara, it may be taking a walk around the park with people you might not have met before. You know, Rachel, it may be having conversations about books that you've read, and suddenly they're on a they're on a curriculum somewhere and shaping and influencing ideas there as well, and having those kind of seeding effects. One of the things that I talk about when I'm working with psychologists who are themselves kind of thinking about where they want to make their contribution, where they, how they want to shift their private practices to this, to this more explicit kind of regenerative focus, is this experience that I have to share with you. And I call it, it's highly scientific. It's called the chumba, 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 whooshka model. And you didn't anticipate I'd be telling you about this when you came on this podcast this morning. But this is the experience of exponential change, right? Because, Rachel, you've seen, feel creating slow, but an exponential change curve at the bottom, we saw it with the flipping pandemic, right? We would see these curves as, the Financial Times was kind of plotting these curves and showing us, and we would see that little tip start to go up and then whooshka. So the idea that we should give up because it feels slow is like another one of those things I'd love us to kind of push back against, because the experience can feel slow, but that can also be an exponential change curve in the making. So, yeah, I don't know if you've kind of come across some of those experiences as well, as of where it feels slow and then suddenly it can shift or change.
I know I certainly have. So one of the things I think that was really important for me, and I'm thinking if there's somebody watching today who's new to independent practice as a psychologist, or, further down the line, is that I had the stable base of my private practice. So that was kind of just running itself. I didn't have to worry. So I could take more risks with my philanthropic time. And, being realistic, you can't just start a project if you need income. We need income. We can't live off air. So that I was very fortunate, because I'd already set up my practice. It had been running quite a while, and that allowed me then the vulnerability and the time to just go, right, I can try this, I can do this, and just being really realistic with, when we look at perfectionism and burnout, it's really easy, isn't it, to think I can do this, I can do that, and you can see all these fantastic people on Instagram doing great things, but it's got to be practical, hasn't it, as well? So, allowing yourself time. Can I do this? What can I afford? And that helped me keep really structured. I've only got this time to do this walk. That's why our walks are on certain days at certain times, because that's when I don't work. And allowing that, but also I think having good support network. So I have a really good support network with my project, which is really crucial, because it keeps you grounded. There's some days I'm very frontal loby at times. There's people that know me, oh great, right, we should do this, right, let's think about this next, but slowing down again, that's great, but how's it going to fit in realistically? So I think the support system, the stable base of your private practice, making sure you're not stressed because your income's dependent on what you're doing. These are all really probably boring things, but really necessary things to think about, that you've got people to sound off ideas, people to bring you down sometimes and say that's not going to work, or not sure. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Rachel, any experiences around that exponential change?
In terms of the practices, I suppose, a little bit in terms of just feeling like I sort of started dipping my toes in the water and doing what felt like it needed to happen in small ways. And very similar, actually, in some ways to Tara, I've kind of had to do it alongside life and parents and my main job that I'm still doing remotely in order to kind of bring in the income. So it's at the moment, because I'm much earlier in the phase and trying to work out how to make this completely work in terms of a business model, or and how the funding might come through. And so it's definitely been that kind of like jump in, step outside my comfort zone, and try and do things. And as a result, end up having so many amazing conversations. And I think particularly in this area of climate, and there's a lot of people who are really engaged with it and want to see things happening as fast as possible. And as a result, it's a really generous kind of community, and so kind of dynamic and energizing. And so I've found that just sort of started talking about things, having conversations here and there, and ideas then come from that, and people make links, and you suddenly find you're being invited to talk on a podcast. Or I think it's just starting, I think, is the thing. And then I have found, I don't know quite what you're meaning in terms of this exponential curve, but certainly it's not a planned journey, and it's not steps that necessarily I had in mind from the beginning, but I think gradually, if you do what feels important, it can come together.
Yeah, I love that. So a couple of times you've alluded to the fact that this can sometimes feel about like it's like we're going against the grain, like we're taking risks, appropriate risks to do things differently, and sometimes we have to work against kind of perceived barriers or myths. Have you come across that as well? I know, Tara, you've alluded to that a few times. So just wanted to kind of bring in your experiences around, I mean, we talk about here breaking the mold of private practice. And, you know, I'm including your CIC in that overall idea of private practice. But what else have you experienced in this element of needing to go against the grain somehow?
Shall I go first?
Yes. Sorry, Tara. Yes. Apologies.
I think for me, I do a lot of ACT in my private clinic, and I love that kind of end of life question. Acceptance and commitment therapy right. For those people that may be new to that, which is a value-based therapeutic intervention. And one of the questions that I absolutely love is that end of life question. So if you look back over your life, what are you going to think about the decisions you made or didn't make? And for me, even though at times I still struggle with, is this robust enough? Is it, am I doing psychology right? What are the HCPC going to say about this? Is it proper psychology? Is for me, looking back, I want to reach more people, and I can't do that just in my traditional private practice. Not everyone can have access to private psychological treatment. So I want to reach more people. Those are the roots. I used to work in the NHS for many, many years, and I miss that, that people can have free access. That's my value. And I want to reach more people, and I want to empower them to their, that kind of cascade effect, as you say, and also that ripple effect. So my thing is looking back over my life that I know this is the right decision for me. I want to be able to look back and go, yeah, I'm glad I did that. And I know that I will be, even though it involves a bit of vulnerability along the way. And my absolute value is I can reach more people. So that philanthropic part of me is what keeps me going at times when my inner critic goes, no, not sure whether you should be doing this.
Yeah. And is it just inner critic? Or has any pushback come from outside as well?
Good question.
I don't know. I feel like have similar kind of challenges and things that I've come through, and similar inner critic that's sort of asking those questions. And I think a lot of it is personal. I don't think I've felt pushback externally about what I'm trying to do. I don't know if you have, Tara.
Yeah, no, I haven't, which is really interesting. It's purely inner critic, but then sometimes what I might see is when I'm flicking through various publications or Psychologist magazine every month, thinking, oh, maybe I should be doing that. Or, and I think one of the things that's really important for me is obviously the research, the psychologist science of mind and behavior. So we're scientists, practitioners, aren't we, at heart? Is that actually in a community project like mine, it's very difficult to get data at the moment because I need ethical pathways to do that, which would then actually stop people wanting to come along. So at the moment, I've got this whole chicken and egg thing where at some point I have qualitative data that people are happy to give me, but I'm going to need some more robust data at some point. But then that actually involves me having to change the model of what I do, and that's a crossroads. So there is that external influence. In order to get more funding grants to show people how this is working, I need that data. And as a psychologist, I know how to get it, but actually it's at odds at the moment with my model and the ethics of what I'm doing with the people coming along. They don't want to be filling in questionnaires. I don't want them to be seen to be pieces of data. Some of that, again, maybe inner critic, but actually a lot of it is fact. I don't want them to feel that if they come along, they're going to have to be asked certain questions, because at the moment that is not part of our model. So that, I guess, is kind of where perhaps the environmental or the external stuff meets my inner critic as well.
Yeah. I mean, my background is applied psychology, so I did a lot of stats and research methods. And of course, a lot of our frameworks, our research frameworks, as you said, our funding models and so on, are more heavily biased towards the logico-deductive type of science, right? Yeah. Have you collected all this data? Can you show, effect size and all of these other elements? And my thesis was a grounded analytical thesis. It was a living systems model. This is like 1995, 96 that I wrote this. And what we were looking at there is theory generation as opposed to theory testing. Now that, in the grand scheme of things, is as scientific as the logico-deductive. But the system itself, being kind of set up in that way, focuses more on the, have you got the data? Have you got this? And so we have an environment, like you said, a system of regulation, which is not unlike the issues that we've got in terms of our system of regulations anyway, that is then hampering your ability to both continue and to get funding. And so that requires a change in the mechanism as well of how we support these kinds of projects, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think
maybe the
we
kinds
need
of
to start
numbers
with these. Sorry, Rachel, go on.
No, I just think maybe the kinds of numbers that we're looking at as well in terms of kind of, I certainly find within what I'm thinking about doing is there's maybe some outcomes you might measure that would be more traditional kinds of things, but there's also other outcomes in terms of those sort of ripple effects and things that are much harder to kind of get a handle on.
Yes.
And it makes me think of within, I guess, communications around some of these topics and how we kind of try and persuade people on climate, particularly I'm thinking about, but all sorts of topics. In some ways, people are more drawn to stuff than they are to data, and so I wonder whether, as well as thinking about the types of numbers we're trying to collect, maybe there's other ways that we can engage with people who might be interested in sort of funding or supporting these kinds of projects through stories as well as through data.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So finding those alternative sources of funding of people who are more in tune with the different kinds of data, especially more human forms of data like stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so anyone out there who feels like funding any of these projects, who's very happy to kind of base that on the stories and the much more organic forms of data that we can gather, which aren't destructive of the living system that is being supported, because really, Tara, that's what you're referring to. If you come in with this intervention, it's going to destroy the living thing that's been growing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And word of mouth is crucial with community projects as well. We rely a lot on people sharing. A lot of people come along because someone else has told them. So if they're, something as simple, it probably doesn't sound much to someone who is, awarding grants, but, for somebody to say, oh, actually, but you do have to fill this questionnaire, or I didn't like, we also don't know what we're triggering off when we're asking people. So that, the ethical practitioner also has to step in and go, is it all right to be asking this and these questions?
Yes.
So there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about hopes for the future as well. Rachel, can you still hear me? Because I don't know if your feed is... Can you hear me all right?
Yes, am I frozen?
Yeah, a little bit frozen on the video.
Oh,
no worries. But as long as you can hear and we can pick up your audio, we'll be all right. Yeah. So thinking about your hopes for the future, I'm going to come to you first, Rachel, because it feels like hope is a big part of the brand that you're developing, the story that you're developing around climate parenting. What are your hopes for the future for the development and growth of your project, but also just in terms of the impact and this whole topic of climate parenting as well?
Yeah, definitely my main hopes are very existential, I think, in terms of kind of can we as humanity pull together and make the changes that are needed? And I see lots of change happening, so that gives me hope. And I think that hope is sometimes also something that we don't need to wait to appear, but we need to sort of just get involved. So I think through action, through doing things, is how we start to create hope. Right. And so that's one of the ways I think about hope, I guess, on a personal level. And in terms of my project, the sort of smaller personal scale, I guess I definitely hope to be able to roll out the group that I've started in a larger way to reach more people, and to sort of find that sustainable model of funding for me that's going to allow me to do that longer term and to spend more time on it. And so, I'm sort of open to thinking about different collaborations or different ways to connect with others who are interested in similar topics where we might be able to work together. I think that the pilot that I'm running at the moment is feeling like a really positive experience, and there's lots of kind of conversations that are opening up around that. And so, yeah, that would essentially be my hope, to be able to just keep going and do more and make it more my full-time kind of endeavor.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea that action creates hope. Yeah, of course it does. When you say it like, it's like, oh, right. Yeah, of course. We need to just do, and then we'll get some hope. Fantastic. And Tara, for you, what are your hopes for the future in terms of how things might grow and develop with your project,
So for
but
us,
also on the bigger scale?
On a kind of a local scale, we're a CIC. What we're going to do is go into local businesses and do wellbeing training for them, but then they can donate to free community sessions. So we want to move from just doing our walk and talks to community wellbeing sessions that are still free at the point of access for communities. So it's helping businesses understand more about the mental health and emotional health and loneliness and all the needs of their community, so they can choose particular topics that they want to cover or particular populations as well. And that we have a model that we would love to be able to roll out, because it's such an easy, now we've done the kind of legwork, as you say, it's a really easy model to roll out to other local areas. You just need the right kind of people to be running it. You've got to be able to give, and people give and you get from that as well. So it's a really two-way relationship, and that's what I want to see. It's about, again, it sounds a little bit cheesy, but that people don't always need to just go those old school models, or I need to go to a professional to look at my emotional health, that we also help people develop their well-being baseline, and that they can learn what, as you said at the beginning, Wendy, what they have in them already to help them cope with adversity. And our project is Little Stepping. That's why it's called Conversation Starter. We're just a stepping stone. We signpost people onto other services as well. They signpost to us. It's about kind of harnessing what people have in them. Sometimes they just need a little bit of help accessing that, and that's what we do.
Yeah, fantastic. So my brain is kind of summarizing what I hear here a little bit, which is, I talked about conduits to kindness and contribution. And I think, in a sense, the projects that you've both created are conduits to kindness and contribution. But what I also really hear is the importance then of partnership and creating community through partnerships. And essentially, what you've both created are kind of blueprints, if you like, where through those partnerships, other benefits can be kind of transmitted. They're conduits to other benefits. Then they're like little routes, little pipelines. Yeah, wonderful. I love that so much. I'm going to be going back through this podcast and kind of writing my notes, because I've been so into listening to it. But it, like I said earlier, it sparks so many ideas, and I really hope I can see that we had some reaction on social media where people have been really fascinated by this conversation as well. Thank you so much. I want to just finally ask you where people can find you. So, Tara, where can we find you?
So I'm kind of everywhere, but the easiest place to find my everywhere is just drtara.co.uk. So you'll find all my social media, and my Conversation Project Starter is on there as well. And
just remind us the title again, please.
So the project is called the Conversation Starter Project.
Fantastic. Rachel, where can we find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and my website is www.climateparenting.com. So you can find things about the workshops and other things I'm doing on there. And also the climate and nature book group that I mentioned is called the Blue Planet Bookshelf, and that's free, and that's available on a book club's website. So you can just sign up to come along there.
Okay, fantastic. We'll make sure that all of those links are on the show notes for this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing these projects with us today and all of your thoughts and experiences. It's been really generous of you to spend this time. And I know that this is going to create a lot of conversation and a lot of inspiration, and hopefully a lot of hope as well. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And see you. That's the end of our series 1. That was our series finale. So thank you so much for being here. And looking forward to sharing with you what will be coming up in series 2. Keep your eye out for that. Thanks a lot, everyone, and see you next time. I'd love to hear what you think about the Inspiring Psychologist podcast. So please take a moment to leave a review and give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It makes a massive difference in helping us to reach new audiences. If, like me, you're feeling inspired and moved by the private practice stories in our podcasts, please spread the word across your own networks. And why not encourage your colleagues and friends to listen to the podcast too? To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, please be sure to subscribe to the Inspiring Psychologist podcast. You can find out more about all my guests from Series 1 at our website, inspiringpsych.com. That's inspiringpsych.com.